In the year 1958, Rooney Elquist developed a battery-run artificial pacemaker. Now, this was used for the very first pacemaker operation done by the surgeon named Aki Senning, and the operation was done at the Karolinska University Hospital in Stockholm, Sweden. So yeah, pacemakers, I had no idea were invented by Swedes. So if you're not familiar how pacemakers work, they go under the heart of the person that you operated on, and it sends electric pulses to the heart so the muscles can expand and contract so it can regulate your heartbeat.
When the sinoatrial node fails to function correctly, an artificial pacemaker can be fitted to help regulate the heartbeat with small, evenly timed electric shocks. This involves implanting electrodes into one or more of the heart's chambers and implanting a device called the generator just under the skin. For more severe heart conditions, an implantable defibrillator, or ICD, can be used, which is also capable of sensing a stopped heart and delivering an electric shock powerful enough to restart it.
Also, this thing, the Celsius thermometer, came out of Sweden. It was developed by the Swedish mathematician and astronomer by the name of Anders Celsius. Clearly you see where the name came from. Anders Celsius made massive contributions in the field of astronomy, and this new thermometer that he invented that measured 100 degrees between freezing and boiling, this was really his claim to fame, and the majority of countries in the world use Celsius thermometers, so it's a very common measurement system now. Without that, would probably be stuck with just trying to calculate temperature in Fahrenheit, and I don't know, like, I'm not the greatest at math, but just trying to figure out how to calculate in Fahrenheit, like, it hurts my brain. So thank you, Brother Celsius. Next up, we have the 3-point seatbelt. This seatbelt formation is pretty much standard in all vehicles now, and it was developed by Niels Bohlin, who is a Swedish inventor as well as a safety engineer, and this is back in 1959 when he created this for the automobile company Volvo. And the reason why these seatbelts are shaped like a Y is because if you get into an accident, it really disperses the energy across your body, so it's not just like maybe get ripped in half or something, but this kind of really holds you in place so that you're not ripped in half when you crash. I know it's a pretty graphic example, but let's just say that these seat belts save a lot of lives. Statistically, 1 life every 6 minutes to be exact.
If you look at a 3-point safety belt 50 years ago compared to a 3-point safety belt today, it's a huge difference. The basic principles are still there. You can put it on using one hand. It has a good geometry. It's holding the upper body, the lower body. But whatever we will do, we'll still have those basic principles that were established by Niels Bohlin.
Over 100 years ago, Coca-Cola introduced this unique bottle to the rest of the world. Now you show this soda bottle to somebody and right away they'll recognize, oh, that's the Coke bottle. But few people know that this design was created by the Swedish man by the name of Alexander Samuelsson. He was told to create a bottle that people could recognize in the dark just by touching it, or if it was lying on the ground, broken or whatever, people could still recognize it. And Alexander Samuelsson more than delivered on this one. Now, the invention of the ultrasound also has its roots in Sweden. The Swedish doctor by the name of Inge Elder, he worked alongside the Austrian researcher Karl Helmuth Hertz, and they developed the first ultrasound. This became the primary non-invasive way to examine our hearts as well as our internal organs. And of course, when mothers want to determine whether or not they're pregnant or really just check the gender of their baby, they use ultrasound. So this is another invention that completely changed history. And like, what would we do without this next invention? Like, wearing pants just wouldn't be the same. The modern day zipper was created by a Swedish-American inventor, Gideon Sundbach. He had improved upon an earlier, not so effective version that was created back in the year 1913. And this new version that he designed, he called it the separable fastener, and then he patented it in the year 1917. And now we use them when wearing pants or trousers if you're from the UK, as well as other backpacks and other kind of bags. Now, for those of you who are watching this video on your computer, I can almost bet 100% of you are watching it on a flat screen monitor. Sven Torborn Lagerwall, he discovered the ferroelectric liquid crystals back in the year 1979, and this is a technology that led to the development of the flat screen monitors. And from that discovery, flat screen monitors went into mass production since the year 1994.
That's the reason why I bought mine. This monitor has a 60Hz refresh rate with a 1 millisecond gray-to-gray response time.
Also, many families and people out there would probably have gone bankrupt if it wasn't for the invention of Skype. Yeah, you get to save a lot of money on those long distance calls to your relatives overseas.
Hey babe, hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Hey, how's your day?
that was good.
But what you didn't know is that this came out of the mind of a Swedish man. His name was Nicholas Zenström, and he co-developed Skype, and he worked with a team including a Danish inventor by the name of Janos Friis. Creating Skype, of course, capitalized on the use of internet technology, and in the year 2011, Microsoft bought it for $8.5 billion US. And I always thought that Microsoft invented Skype. Nope. So again, we gotta say thank you to the nation of Sweden for saving the rest of us a whole lot of money. Although many of us don't use old school telephones anymore, I thought it was pretty important to share this invention. The Swedish telecommunications company Ericsson was founded by Lars Magnus Ericsson in the year 1876. And the company's first ultra successful product was the telephone handset. It had the mic where you spoke in as well as the earpiece to listen to all in one. Before that, with telephones, you had to hold the microphone in one hand and hold the earpiece in the other hand. Pretty annoying, but this just put it all together in one and just made it so much easier.
Every achievement has been further proof that the frontiers of progress have no limit.
And finally, the last invention and discovery that I want to share that came out of Sweden was the safety matches. Matches, of course, have been around for a long time, right? But they were very dangerous, so you really had to know what you're doing or else you'd get burned and burn up everything and everyone else around you. However, thanks to Gustav Erik Pach, we don't have to worry so much about that anymore. He had decided to move the flammable phosphorus, which was embedded in the match head, to the side of the matchbox, as well as replace the poisonous yellow phosphorus with a red version of the phosphorus that was non-toxic. And because of this, matches became a lot safer. And this was huge for the Swedish economy because several times in history, 75% of all matches sold in the world were coming from Sweden. According to many historians, the Indus Valley civilization has evidence of dentistry being practiced as far back as 7000 BC. There's a site over in Mehrgarh, which is now located in modern-day Pakistan, and it showed evidence of people curing tooth disorders with bow drills. They noticed that tiny holes were drilled on the surface of multiple male molar teeth, and several fossils like this were found. Number 9 brings us toilet systems. Both in Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, almost every single house had a flush toilet connected to a very complex sewage system. Dating back to about 2500 BC, remains from toilets connected to drains were found in Lothal, India. And the reason Indians actually were able to invent this toilage and drainage system is because they actually already had the drainage system, and that was designed to remove floodwaters out of the cities. And so the drainage for the sewage system and the drainage system for floodwater, they're very close together. So they had the technology already, so they decided to use it for sewage as well. Number 8, rulers. That's what we got to look at next, but not rulers like rulers of civilizations, but rulers that are used for measurements. Areas of the Indus Valley civilization in both what is now known as Pakistan as well as Western India, they've had rulers that were made out of ivory. And these kinds of rulers were very popular because bricks that were used in the valley's buildings, they were discovered to be pretty much the exact same measurements. So of course these ivory rulers were allowing them to measure bricks pretty much exactly the same in size. Speaking of measurements though, let's talk about scales. The earliest existence of scales used for measuring also date back to between 2400 BC to up until about 800 BC in the Indus Valley civilization. So these date balances were used to measure and compare objects and products that were bought and sold and traded. Number 6 is also a very mind-blowing one, plastic surgery. Now, this is normally thought of as a modern invention, but historians believe that plastic surgery was happening back in India as early as around 2000 BC. And just to clarify, what I mean when I refer to plastic, like I'm not talking about the petroleum byproduct used to be molded into solid objects, but what I'm referring to is the art of modeling malleable flesh. The ancient Indian physician Sushruta is credited for being the father of plastic surgery. We got 5 more ancient discoveries and inventions to look at. Number 5 brings us the Pythagorean theorem. Now, I've heard this pronounced in multiple different ways, and as a matter of fact, I haven't heard this term since I was in school. Mesopotamian, Indian, and Chinese mathematicians all discovered this, and this was long before Pythagoras did, even though this was named after him. Now, the theorem states that the area of the square whose side is opposite the right angle is equal to the sum of the areas of the squares on the other 2 sides. But specifically over in India, the Badhyana Sulba Sutra between about 800 BC to 500 BC contains a statement of the Pythagorean theorem. Crucible steel comes in at number 4. Historians now believe that by at least 200 BC, South India was producing very high quality steel. As a matter of fact, they were using a method that Europeans were actually going to later call the crucible technique. Wrought iron, charcoal, as well as glass were all mixed together and heated until the iron melted and absorbed the carbon, and that formed a high-grade steel. Cataract surgery comes in number 3. Now, there's Indian physicians who were known for practicing different kind of cataract surgery that were known to the Greeks around 200 BC. The surgery was performed with a tool known as the Jabamukhi Salaka, and that's a curved needle that's used to loosen the lens and push the cataract out of the field of vision. The spinning wheel comes in at number 2. Now, this is a mechanized method of spinning yarn that was invented in India between the years 500 AD to about 1000 AD, and this eventually replaced the hand spinning that was very popular in different parts of the world. The charkha, as it was known as, eventually went on to become the symbol of Indians' independence movement. And finally, at number 1, the orbit of the Earth. Hindu cosmological time cycles that are found in the Surya Siddhanta, they were written between 700 BC to 600 AD, and it states that the time that it takes the Earth to revolve around the Sun is 365.25 days. This actually was the most accurate estimate in the world. We have universities. Fatima Al-Furaya was an Arab Muslim who is credited for founding the oldest existing, continually operating, and first educational institution in the world to award degrees. This is the University of Al-Qurarin in Fez, Morocco. When Fatima's father passed away, he left some money behind for her and her sister, and she used her inheritance to build the university. It started off as a mosque, and it later grew into a place for education. Now, there were a lot of different subjects such as astrology, chemistry, grammar, algebra, medicine, and music. All of that was taught at this university. The library that was founded at the university contains more than 4,000 manuscripts, as well as 9th century Quran and the earliest collection of hadith, which are the record and traditions or sayings of the Prophet Muhammad. At number 9, we have the crankshafts. Many of the basics of modern automatics were first put to use in the Muslim world, including the revolutionary crank connecting rod system. So by converting rotary motion, which is motion revolving around a center or an axis, to linear motion, the crank enables the lift of heavy objects more easily. The technology was discovered by Al-Jazari in the 12th century, and it continued to spread globally, and that's why we have things like bicycles as well as the internal combustion engine. Pointed arches come in at number 8. So these pointed arches, they're really characteristic of Europe's Gothic cathedrals, but it was actually an invention that was borrowed from Islamic architecture. It was much stronger than the rounded arch used by Romans, thus allowing the building to be made bigger and higher as well as more complex. Europe's castles also were modified to be more like the buildings in the Islamic world. The windmill was another invention attributed to the Islamic world. So the windmill was invented invented in 634 for a Persian caliph, and initially electricity wasn't made from these windmills. Instead, they were used to grind corn as well as draw up water for irrigation. In Arabia, when the water streams ran dry, the only source of power was the wind. These windmills had 6 or 12 sails, and it was about 500 years before the first windmill was seen in Europe. Now we got vaccination. So most of us were taught in school that inculcation or vaccination was invented by Edward Jenner and Louis Pasteur. It was actually Muslims who first came up with this technique, which was later brought to Europe from Turkey by the wife of the English ambassador in the year 1724. Children in Turkey were vaccinated with cowpox to fight the deadly smallpox at least 50 years before the West had discovered it. Halfway in, we got rocket and torpedoes. Although the Chinese invented saltpeter gunpowder and used it in their fireworks, it was actually the Arabs who worked out that it could be purified using potassium nitrate and be used for military purposes. By the 15th century, they had invented both a rocket, which they called a self-moving and combusting egg, and also they invented a torpedo, which was a self-propelled pear-shaped bomb with a spear at the front of it, which allowed it to impale enemy ships and then explode. Now this one was really surprising, paychecks. So the modern paychecks comes from the Arabs because trading was a popular profession of the 9th century. So a written vow to pay for goods when they were delivered was developed by a Muslim businessman. So anyone could cash a check in China that was from a bank in Baghdad, let's say. Now this was done in order to avoid money having to be transported across lands that was dangerous because you risk them getting stolen in transit. Shampoo comes in at number 3. So washing and bathing are required for Muslims to pray, which is perhaps why they really perfected the recipe for soap that is still used today. Hazrat Salih, he's known to have invented soap as we know it today. The ancient Egyptians had soap of a sort as well as the Romans did, but it was the Arab Muslims who combined vegetable oils and sodium hydroxide as well as scented ingredients. And the shampoo was introduced to England by a Muslim who opened Muhammad's Indian vapor bath in the year 1759. We're coming down close to the end of this video. Number 2 brings us world maps. So have you seen this 12th century map of the Andalusian cartographer Al-Idrisi? He lived from 1100 to 1166. This map was first produced in Sicily and is seen as the most complete description of the world that was made in medieval times. It was used a lot by travelers for centuries, and it contained detailed descriptions of the Christian world as well as the Islamic world, and also Africa and other places. Now the number 1 Muslim discovery and invention is astronomical computers. Miriam Al-Idliya is famous for constructing astrolabes, which were used to determine the position of the sun and the planets, and were in turn used in the field of astronomy, astrology, as well as horoscopes. During the 10th century in Aleppo, Syria, she created designs that were so intricate from 944 to 967 AD that she was hired by the ruler of the city, Saif al-Dawla. Starting at number 10, this was a surprising one, 3D movie glasses. 3D movies are now seen pretty much in every theater, and they've gotten a lot more popular over the last decade, but the 3D cinema goes back to Theodore Ionescu and his patent for 3D imaging in cinema and television in the year 1936. Now 3D images were invented earlier by a man named Sir Charles Wheatstone, but Theodore Ionescu was the one that applied it for the movie theater as well as television. In at number 9, we have this invention right here, the fountain pen. Did you know that this was invented by a Romanian? Yeah, well now you do. So a man by the name of Petrat Poneru, back in the year 1827, he invented the world's first fountain pen. Now his invention was patented by the French government because he invented it while he was in Paris for school. He described this pen as one that endlessly is feeding ink to itself. This invention, of course, changed the field of writing forever. Biospeleology comes in at number 8. Born in the year 1868, Emil Rocovita was a Romanian biologist, zoologist, and speleologist. He is considered to be the founder of biospeleology, and pretty much biospeleology, aka cave biology, is a branch of biology focused on the study of organisms that live inside caves. Emil Rakovita was the first Romanian who went on a scientific research expedition in the Antarctic, and he was also a professor, a scholar, as well as a researcher. In at the number 7 spot, we have Hyper CD-ROM. So right now we're so accustomed to using USB sticks, external hard drives, cloud storage, but before all of that there was the CD-ROM. Eugen Pavel is the Romanian scientist who invented the Hyper CD-ROM. Now this was a 3D optical data storage device with a storage capacity of 1 million gigabytes, equal to 10,000 classic CDs. Now this changed the way information was stored and transferred. Now in November of 1999, the invention was first presented at the 48th World Expedition of Innovation and New Technology over in Belgium. Next up is the Teclu burner. So the Teclu burner is a gas burner for use in labs, and it's a variant of the Bunsen burner. The Teclu burner is named after a Romanian chemist by the name of Nicolae Teclu, and the burner can produce a much hotter flame than a Bunsen burner. The Teclu burner provides better mixing of air and fuel, which is what allows it to produce a higher flame temperature than the Bunsen burner. So depending on what sort of lab testing that you're doing, you'll definitely need that extra heat. Leave it up to the Romanians to bring some extra fire into the world. Halfway in, we have the injection seat. So we've all seen this in movies and TV shows, but it was Anastasi Dragomir who invented the injection seat back in the year 1928, and also the injection cabin in the year 1930. The invention was patented in France and called, and guys, pardon my French, but this was the name, Nouveau Système de Parachute of Montage of dans les appareils RNA locomotion. And I'll just put it up on the screen so you can read and follow along. So just imagine trying to sing that twice in a sentence. Like, I know my French isn't the best, so you know what? I'm just gonna stick to injection seat, okay? At number 4, we have the liquid fueled rocket motor. So going to the moon nowadays may not seem like such a big deal anymore, but the first time it happened, it was definitely the biggest deal ever. Hermann Oberth is seen as one of the founding fathers of rocketry and astronautics, along with Russian Konstantin Tsiolkovsky and the American Robert Goddard. Definitely couldn't leave them out. So in the year 1929, Hermann Oberth conducted an experiment on his first liquid-fueled rocket motor, helped by a student by the name of Wernher von Braun. This led to the Saturn V rocket being created, which made landing on the moon possible. Now we have the anti-aging cream. The Girovital H3 formula, also known as the GH3, was discovered by Dr. Anna Aslan, who spent most of her time studying and researching about the aging process and anti-aging remedies. Dr. Anna Aslan discovered how the aging process could be influenced, and in 1960 this formula here was created, and now her creams were used by people like John F. Kennedy, Charlie Chaplin, and Salvador Dali. And you know, this cream can still be bought to this very day.
Girovital hyaluronic acid ampules, which act like an army of perfectly trained professionals.
Now the second last discovery is one with a little bit of controversy around it. The pancreatine, later named insulin, was discovered by Romanian psychologist and medicine professor Nicolae Constantin Popescu back in the year 1922. Now in 1916, he developed a pancreatic extract and tested it on a dog that had diabetes, and it normalized the blood sugar levels. He published his results several times in a French magazine in the year 1921 and patented it. However, he didn't get any recognition for it at the time. That's why there's a lot of people still speculating on whether or not he was the actual person that first invented insulin. Now the number one thing is the aerodynamic cars. So Aurel Perciu, this man, he lived from 1890 to 1977, and he was a Romanian engineer and the first to put the wheels inside of the body of a car to reach a more aerodynamic shape for cars. Now it may not seem like a huge deal now because we're just so used to seeing cars designed this way, but after countless hours of testing and many experiments, he concluded that the most aerodynamic automobile needed to have the shape of a falling water drop. The design was patented in Germany in 1924 and then in US in 1927. The original prototype can still be seen today at the Dimitri Leonida Technical Museum in Bucharest, Romania. Now, if Alexander Fleming, who was a Scottish scientist, had not discovered penicillin, which were the first antibiotics, in the year 1928, we would probably still be dying from things like stomach ulcers, as well as strep throat and scarlet fever, staph infections, Lyme diseases, all of that. But actually, a bonus fact, I'm actually allergic to penicillin, so if I take it, I could literally just drop dead. So I'm probably better off getting one of these diseases that I just mentioned than actually taking these antibiotics. But either way, there's no doubt that penicillin has been a game-changing lifesaver, more than people even realize. Penicillins are actually a group of antibacterial drugs that attack a wide range of bacteria. Now, they were the first drugs of its type that doctors used, and drugs in the penicillin class work by indirectly bursting the bacterial cell walls. And they do this by acting directly on the peptidoglycans, which play a very important role in structuring bacterial cells. Now, peptidoglycans create a mesh-like structure around the plasma membrane of bacterial cells, and then it increases the strength of the cell walls and prevents external fluids and particles from entering into the cell. So penicillins disrupt this whole process. And our number 9 brings us electricity. Now, the life-changing discovery of electricity is attributed to the English scientist Michael Faraday, and his main discoveries include the principle underlying electromagnetic induction, diamagnetism, as well as electrolysis. Faraday's experiments also created the first generator, which was a forerunner of the huge generators that produce our electricity today. Electricity is the flow of electrical power or charge. And electricity is both a basic part of nature as well as one of the most widely used forms of energy. And it's pretty unique because electricity that we use is actually a secondary energy source because it's produced by converting primary sources of energy such as coal, natural gases, nuclear energy, solar energy, and wind energy into electrical power. And electricity is also referred to as an energy carrier, and this means that it can be converted to other forms of energy such as mechanical energy or even heat. And primary energy sources are renewable or non-renewable energy, but the electricity that we use is neither renewable nor non-renewable. The discovery at number 8 is gravitational waves. Gravitational waves proved Einstein's theory of general relativity. Albert Einstein's theory of general relativity states that space and time are unified into one continuum, space-time. Objects in the universe, no matter their size, warp space-time as they move, creating ripples known as gravitational waves. Until recently, however, that theory was just that, simply a theory. But new technological advancements allow astrophysicists to measure the massive gravitational waves created by huge objects in deep space. Usually these come from black holes and neutron stars millions and millions of light years away, so their waves are incredibly faint by the time they even reach Earth. But speaking of that, we have to go on to the discovery of the theory of relativity. Encompassing two interrelated theories by Albert Einstein, special relativity and general relativity. This theory of relativity, which was published in the year 1905, transformed theoretical physics and astronomy during the 20th century, superseding a 200-year-old theory of mechanics created primarily by Newton. Now, this theory became the foundation of much of modern science as we know it. Moving on now to number 6, we have the periodic table. So back in the year 1869, there was a Russian chemist by the name of Dmitry Mendeleev, and he noticed that when arranged by atomic weight, the chemical elements lined up to form groups with similar properties. With this knowledge, he was able to create the first periodic table, which was one of the most important discoveries ever in chemistry. Now, the periodic table, also known as the periodic table of elements, is organized so that scientists can quickly determine the properties of individual elements, such as their mass, their electron number, as well as the electron configuration and their unique chemical properties. Now, metals reside on the left side of the table, while non-metals reside on the right side of the table. Halfway into this episode, at number 5, let's talk about the theory of evolution by natural selection. Now, this one has become a debatable topic, and it's been one for years, with many people not even considering it as a science. But regardless of where you are on the belief spectrum, there's no doubt that this one has definitely changed the world of science. Inspired by the observation he made on the second survey survey voyage of the Beagle between the years 1831 and 1836, Charles Darwin began to develop what later became known as the theory of evolution by natural selection, which is the key mechanics of evolution. And the theory has two main points, and this is according to Brian Richmond, who is a curator of human origins at the American University of Natural History in New York City. He says, all life on Earth is connected and related to each other. And this diversity of life is a product of modifications of populations by natural selection, where some traits were favored in an environment over others. And this theory, by the way, is sometimes described as survival of the fittest, but that can actually be misleading, that term, survival of the fittest. When it comes to the theory of evolution by natural selection, the term fitness refers not to the organism's strength or its athletic ability, but rather it refers to the ability to survive as well as reproduce. Number 4 brings us scientists who have successfully edited the first human embryo ever in the United States. Now this was in July 27th of 2017. Researchers in Portland, Oregon, they achieved a significant breakthrough in gene editing technology. Taking advantage of the revolutionary gene editing technique CRISPR, a gene linked to heat conditions was successfully deleted from a human embryo. Moving on now to number 3, scientists discovered an alien planet that's the best candidate for life as we know it. So on April 19th, scientists at the European Organization for Astronomical Research, or the ESO, found the best candidate for extraterrestrial life so far. Now this super Earth is named LHS 1140b, and it was found in the habitable zone of a dim star 40 light years away from Earth. It receives about half as much sunlight from its star, the LHS 1140, as the Earth does from the sun. So I know there's been a lot of talk recently about us colonizing Mars and Mars being the next place for human beings to live, because let's face it, sometimes we treat the Earth really bad. Who knows how long it's gonna last. But hey, this one may prove as a better contender than even Mars. Next up at number 2, I want to talk about the scientists who are one step closer to growing human organs in pigs. So scientists at the Salk Institute in California, they said that they're one step closer to being able to grow human organs inside of pigs. In their latest research, they were able to grow human cells inside of pig embryos, which is a small but promising step toward organ growth. But why would anybody want this research done in the first place? Well, you see, scientists say that it could help with studying disease and help develop different drugs. It could also be a way to help with human organ donation as well. And finally, number 1, this one, definitely a game changer, DNA. So many people believe that American biologist James Watson, as well as English physicist Francis Crick, were the ones who discovered DNA back in the 1950s. But in fact, it was first identified in the late 1860s by a Swiss chemist named Friedrich Miescher. And then in the decades following Miescher's discovery, other scientists carried out many research studies that helped us understand how organisms pass on their genes and how the workings of cells are actually governed. DNA has even come in handy where people can actually mix DNA and produce a child with certain eye colors and certain characteristics. And it's also been a game changer when it comes to crime, because if it wasn't for the discovery of DNA, a lot more people would be behind bars than there currently are.